Well, I kind of wish there was a wall here that I could just kind of disappear and then reappear. Um, 2 weeks ago, we as a nation witnessed the first the first debate for trying to get someone nominated for the Republican Party to run against the Democrats. So we were featured with what is closely similar to a massive cage fight, where your candidates are all in a cage. They can't get out for the 2 hours where the debate is taking place. And then the commentators afterwards are lifting up what were the punches, who landed the punches, what were they, which lines, well-rehearsed lines, have gone viral, who was able to state their case, and who just got slaughtered or did not rise to the occasion. We hear this continual assessment of the debates. Unfortunately, this is how in America at this time we choose our leaders. We hope, apparently, by the way that they construct the debates, which I have a problem with, we hope that they will be able to be strong, that there's that there's a fight going on, a battle to see who is going to be the leader. It's an idea of leadership which is, to me, highly dysfunctional. Your most aggressive people, later on, they might turn to somebody that they've been punching and say, I want you to be my vice president. But for now, boom, they're in the ring. That's how we do it. You compare that way of choosing a leader, a dominating leader, with the way that Moses as a leader came about. You have to just separate those two processes and then to look at today's story about how a leader arose. The impact of Moses is unfathomable in human history. In 1776, before the ink was dried on the Declaration of Independence, the Congress, the first Congress, Congressional Congress, or the Continental Congress, took 3 men aside and said, we want you to design a symbol, a seal, that represents our new country, the United States. And they chose John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. And these 3 men went aside and designed it and came back and presented. The new seal of the United States of America had in its core this image of Moses leading his people through the Red Sea, leading his people from tyranny and bondage and slavery to freedom. That's what they chose. Later, at the death of George Washington in 1799, 2/3 of the people who eulogized our first president used the term America's Moses. Later, Benjamin Franklin in 1788 looked out upon the confusion that was going on in the states. Thank God we don't have that now. But the confusion going on in the states as to picking their forms of government, as to picking their laws that were appropriate to their state. And it was a mess. And so he stood up and said, I suggest that until those laws can be formed and agreed upon, that you enact in your state the law of Moses. John Adams, our second president, said, I love the Greeks. I love Greek philosophy. I admire them. I read them so much. But it was the Hebrews who taught us more about enlightenment and civilization, of how we should be in the world. It was Moses who taught us more about how to be a people than all the Greek philosophy combined. If you haven't heard this, The impact of Moses upon our own system is deep. And not only that, in history, well, you have Lincoln, who upon his assassination, the black community rose up and said, "We have lost our Moses." All those references over and over. Martin Luther King Jr. was considered a modern Moses. Not just that, right now, last 30, 40, 50 years, wherever there is a movement toward liberation, whether it is upturning the laws of apartheid, the policies of oppression in South Africa, or turning over the rule of despots, of tyrants in South America, they follow the model of the Exodus, the model of which one man comes against a tyrant and leads his people through a sea of fear into a promised tomorrow in which they will be treated with dignity and respect. Who is this Moses that had such enormous impact upon our lives in ways that we cannot even measure? Today we hear that it was a man, last week we heard that about his amazing birth story. We heard that he was a dual citizen in the world of Egypt, living in the courts of Egypt under the protection of his adopted mother, the princess of Egypt. And he was able to go among his kindred and see what their conditions were like. And for 40 years, that was his life. My goodness, someone like that could have really enacted change. Someone with a foot across the aisle could have really brought people together, maybe ended slavery through new policies. But one day, he looked out and saw an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew slave. He was outraged. And so in the intervention where he saw the injustice, he killed the taskmaster, and he buried the taskmaster in the sand. It was later discovered, and Pharaoh, it is said, sought to kill him. Pharaoh, his granddaddy by adoption, sought to kill him. I don't think there was any love lost in that relationship. So with Pharaoh at his back, and if you know the whole story of Moses, you know that Pharaoh was always at his back. He fled. 1 to 2 weeks journey it takes to go to Midian. Midian is what is now the upper part of Saudi Arabia. Who lives in Midian? Not townspeople, not city dwellers. They are Bedouins. They migrate with their flocks. Moses was 40 years old when he had to go into exile. For 40 years, he was in exile. He found his wife by basically helping her. There were some shepherds who were not allowing her access to the well. And so again, that drive to justice, he was outraged, he intervened, he helped with the water. The father of Zipporah said, "I offered my daughter to you." He accepted. This was going to be his life. This was his life. For 40 then extra years, he lived with his father-in-law Jethro and his wife Zipporah, and he tended his father-in-law's flock. 40 years. Isn't that what we call our average work years before retirement? At the end of that, he's 80 years old. 80 years old. And he's out tending the sheep. And he looks up, and there is a bush. And it's burning, but it's not burning up. So he's there with his flock, and he decides to take a little journey to see, to observe with his eyes what this is all about. I am fascinated today mostly with that journey. What does it take to leave our lives for a moment and to gaze upon something that becomes the very revelation of God to humanity? He didn't know that when he went there. But after a voice came out, he was no longer that interested in a bush that was burning. He was now engaged in a relationship. He was engaged in a conversation. And Moses heard a revelation of who God was. Not only was God the I am, I exist, of people who define themselves, I'm spiritual but not religious. I just love to be in nature and I feel the glory of God all around me. Yeah, that tells only part of the story. This is God, I am, and I have heard the cries of my people, the cries of those who are oppressed, of those who are not given dignity, of the beaten up people of the earth. I have heard. That is the full picture of our God in the Judeo-Christian understanding. Not just God is out there, what a lovely thing, but God intervenes, interferes in human history to bring about a completion. History is not just cyclical. We see that all the time. Wow. Even in the debate process. Wow, we've been here before. But history is also linear. It is going somewhere. And the way we know it's going somewhere is the testimony, the intervention of God within history, within an event of the Exodus, which God hears the cries of the people and picks an unlikely candidate, someone who would absolutely fail in the Republican or Democratic debate. He would not hold up. He was timid. He, in his own self-definition, is, I am slow of speech and heavy of tongue. That's how he defined himself. He's not a great debater. That was his argument. Don't send me. I can't talk. He also said, don't send me because what if I get up and say something and nobody follows me? What if I have no impact? And God is just rolling God's eyes and going, okay, I'm going to supply you everything you need to succeed. And his last plea, Moses' last plea to God, please, please, please don't send me. This is the very opposite of today's leadership model in which somebody aspires to lead and will do whatever it takes to ascend to those positions of power. Moses just wanted to be out of the equation. I like my life now. I'm in exile, but I have a wonderful wife. We're growing old together. I tend sheep. Let me just embrace the life that I have. And just God, in all God's gentleness, said, no, that's not going to happen. Why? Because I am the God who hears the oppression outside of your tent, outside of the nice times you have with your sheep, leading them to pastures. I'm the one who hears the cries of the earth. And there's a better way. And I am the end of all tyranny. And I am the end of all the isms of ageism and racism. I am the end of that. You might still see it on planet Earth, but when you draw close to me, you draw close to the end of all tyranny. Moses didn't want that. And God said, I'm going to give you your brother Aaron. And he could speak. He's eloquent. He's a good debater, etc. I'm going to give you words. You're going to tell Aaron. Aaron's going to speak to Pharaoh. Okay. That's Moses. And when you follow his story, that continues. That element of humility, it is said by, who was it? George W. Bush said this, and most of the presidents agreed, that the primary quality that makes a good president is humility. And if you don't have it in the debate cycle as you're trying to get the office, it will come to you as a gift of the office over and over and over again. You will learn humility, and that will be the path toward leadership and your greatness, if you could listen and learn humility. Moses was a servant leader who learned the lesson of humility. Thousands of years later, we come to the New Testament. We are drawn to the image of the cross of Jesus, an act of empire, an act of tyranny, the cross, a way of controlling the population, the Lord, the Son of God, hanging upon the instrument of Pharaoh, dying, bleeding. But we put that together with the empty tomb. That is why you got out of bed this morning and were called away from your life, because you saw a bush that was burning but was not consumed. And today, as you come forward to receive the gift of the bread and the wine, you're coming forward to hear the voice out of those elements saying, I am here for you. And I contain within myself the fullness of who I created you to be. I contain within my being the you that I know you will be. You will be healed. Your tears will be dried up. All your addictions, I know, will be gone. You might have all of those fears, all of the self-doubt now, part of your life. But when we come and we receive the bread and we dip the bread into the juice, just remember that your healing and your wholeness is absolutely guaranteed. Not just from the message to Moses, but coming out of the great burning bush of all times, the cross and the empty tomb of Jesus Christ. You will be whole. And because of that, you are whole even now. So as we move to this, put your hands out to receive something we never deserved. It was a surprise that we left our sheep because we were curious, and we were hearing the very words of God that heals our lives. Amen, amen, and amen.